Carlos Nelson with Cascade Media Group, and tonight we're going to be highlighting another one of our urban professionals and someone that has been instrumental in growing our community in the field of development. We have Mr. Emmett Pearson on. How you doing, Emmett?
I am doing great. I am so honored to finally be at the foot of Mr. Nelson and Cascade Media.
Emmett, cut it out, man.
I can't believe I'm here right now.
You are too silly.
I mean,
like my boy.
In OG, I'm here. I'm here.
Hey, no, Emmett, run down a little bit about yourself. And I'm saying go back to your grade school. Tell our audience a little bit about who you are and how you rose to the position that you're in right now.
Yeah, so, I'm a city kid. I grew up at 52nd in Brooklyn. My mom, my 89-year-old mom is still there, will not leave. So I'm a product of the Blue Hills neighborhood. I'm a public transportation kid because my mom has never driven and she still has never driven. So I took 3 buses to get to my grade school visitation, which is right off the plaza. I went to Rockhurst High School where, I got to see how the haves and have-nots interact with one another between there and visitation. And then I went to the University of Kansas. And so, my mom was an old teacher, a Montessori teacher, at Bishop Helmsing, for those old schools that remember Bishop Helmsing, right on what's now Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard. So I'm a city kid that has the great fortune of now running the largest minority-led urban not-for-profit development company in the region, Community Builders of Kansas City.
Let's talk about, first of all, I'm remiss without talking about my partner, Chuck Gatson, who was one of your mentors. Give just a little bit of information on your relationship with Chuck to our audience and the dream that you're making come true.
Yeah, so I hope I don't get choked up about it. So Chuck, first of all, I've never had a bad boss. Let me just say that. Going back to Everett Tomlin, for those folk who know, he was my real first boss in this field. Then it was Carl Atterbury. Then it was Don Maxwell. And then it was Chuck Gatson, was kind of my last boss before I went out on my own and created a company. Where do I begin with Chuck? He actually came and recruited me to come work with him. And at that time, Frank Ellis. And so, when I got over here, it took a while to get me, but when I got over here, they were doing tremendous things. They were finishing up the office building, commonly known as Mazuma Building. We had on the books to do a grocery store and a shopping center, which is what the community had been clamoring for. And he came over and said, "Young blood, do what you do." And I was like, well, hey. And he said, "No, do what you do." And so I was in meetings that I probably shouldn't have been in. I was in meetings when they talked about, what we should be doing. I was in the meetings with the senior leadership team here, the executive leadership team with Frank Ellis and all the other executives. So, I went to him and I witnessed him and Senator Bond smoke on cigars and put their feet up on the desk. So, he is so inspiring for me. And one of the first projects when I came back to Community Builders was to get something that would honor his legacy and the memory of him along Blue Parkway, or Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard, what is known now, on our campus here, the Community Builders of Kansas City campus that we share with Swope Health Services.
Talk about some of the projects that you've engaged in since you took the helm.
Well, our most recent project and a Business Journal, Kansas City Business Journal Cornerstone Award winner is named after Rochester Charles or Chuck Gatson. That was important because we would always walk by this plot of land on our campus and we were like, we're going to do something there. And because we had so many other projects going on with the shopping center and the office building and the other office building, we didn't get to develop that piece of land. So when I came back, I told my staff and colleagues here, I'm getting ready to do this market rate project on the east side, which hasn't been done. And it's going to be basically the Taj Mahal. No expense was spared because of the tremendous need, but also because of what it meant to have it named after Rochester Charles Gatson. And he was not a fan of Rochester, so I would call him that to irritate him all the time.
I
Rochester,
love you, Emmett. What you say to irritate you?
irritated. Rochester, hey. People like, stop calling me that. I'm like, that's your government
name.
That's your name. And so when I came back and we were getting ready to do this project, I called up his wife, Alice. And I said, hey, Alice, we're going to do this project. It's going to be great. Here's what it looks like. And I'm going to name it the Rochester. And she just fell out laughing immediately. She's like, that's so fitting because you called him that all the time. He would get irritated. I'm like, stop getting mad. It's your name. And so that's why it's called the Rochester. And I think it is stylish like him. He was as you know, he was a fancy dresser, love fedoras, love style, and that's what the Rochester reflects.
Love that jazz, baby.
Love that jazz. So all of that is incorporated into the Rochester. But that's just one of our projects. We have another project that we've acquired the old Zion Grove Missionary Baptist Church, the old shopping
That's the
center.
one that Talk about that project, what that's going to be.
Yeah, so it's a total of 11 acres that we acquired. And it's over 7 phases, if you will. But the first phase we're so excited about because it is a 60,000 square foot office building. And people say, well, why are you doing an office building, one on the east side, and coming out of COVID? One, because our office building we currently have now, I'm 100% leased up. And people are still calling and saying, hey, we need some space, and we don't have any. All of the redevelopment with regards to office should not only be confined to the Crossroads, the Plaza, downtown. We have a whole thriving east side, which is not what everybody thinks is a whole bunch of shooting and killing every day. We have proved that that's not the case with all of our $300 million worth of development on the last 25 years that's occurred on the east side. And so we are extremely fortunate to have partners such as Health Forward Foundation that is moving their headquarters, and they are in fact taking a third of this new building that's going to look like a piece of art. So, Carlos, it's an office building, it's phase 1, but quickly behind that will be a phase 2 of mixed income housing, much like the Rochester development as well. And then depending on how market forces go, we have plans for a second office building and some additional mixed income housing as well. We also made sure that we heard what the neighborhood said, particularly Town Fork Creek. And they said, we want a walking trail because going across, 6 lanes of traffic to get on the parkland is too difficult. So we have about a 3/4 mile walking trail that we currently have there. So right now, if you drive by there, you'll see the most manicured parking lot that's brand new, and that's because we were successful in getting a large CCED grant to do some of the infrastructure. Right now, Carlos, Communities has about $3.5 million of our own cash invested in that development, and so we're looking to go vertical probably the fourth quarter of this year.
Tell me this: how do you feel the city, the county, and the state are helping you or working with you to acquire your goals?
So, we don't do a lot with the county just yet. And even when Chuck was here, we didn't do a great deal with the county. With the new legislators there, we're trying to get more engaged and see how we can be a part of the county. At the state, we were unsuccessful this year with the leadership of Senator Washington to try to get into the state budget, but it's not for her not trying and us not trying. And then the city, we are always trying to work better with the city, and I'm going to leave it at that.
That's a delicate job.
It is because, we've talked about some of my mentors and who I grew up around. So, I was there as a young lad with James I. 3, who's a titan of economic development, former assistant city manager, that did so much from a economic development standpoint out of the old model cities model. Then it went on to Jim Bond, and then it went on to Stan Barrett, and I was at the feet of all those folks. I was in those meetings with my brother-in-law, and then, now Representative Cleaver, but Mayor Cleaver, brought me into those conversations with Carl Atterbury and all of those titans of economic development. I remember being in a meeting with, Charles Hasley, and they were talking about, doing stuff. And I'm going to take you back to doing stuff with Bob Brim.
Oh, the fire station.
I mean, so one, that's how far I go back in economic development. And so those days of working with the city were so different than they are now. One is, the city is going through its turmoil of staff. So now we have a new housing director, and so it's just trying to find the footing to find a groove and a rhythm to work with the city that works well for us. I'm always going to push the envelope as far as needing resources, because my organization speaks for oftentimes a community that's been marginalized, and I'm not about to let that continually happen. So it's a delicate dance, but I'm hopeful that we have a brand new council. We have some consistency with some of those members. I'm excited for Madam Mayor Pro Tem to see how she's going to make her influence happen, and then working with Mayor Lucas and trying to get him more into the economic development. I think if we bolster our economic development in our neighborhoods, maybe that might help to sway a little bit of this crime way that we're currently seeing.
Hey, let me say this. I think I said to you I wanted to talk to you off camera about a few things, and I gave you a little background about my construction background. You hit a key point. I don't care what they're doing in the city, the county, or whatever, with all these meetings and marches about crime, until they hit the economic part of it, creating jobs, what you just was saying, maybe with development, but it doesn't go real well if you haven't planned. A lot of the contractors, or the few that I know, well, we don't have no workforce. And I'm like, have you developed your own workforce? I'm like, nobody's going to develop that for you. And that means you might not benefit from it right now, but if you plant the seed, and I love how you gave the progression of how you got where you're at. I had no idea that you came up under Maxwell. Carl Atterbury, I told you he put me on my first, him and Alex Harris gave me my first chance to be a big time contractor back in the day by giving me my first sixplex to renovate. HDCIC.
So that's where I started. I started with HDCIC, then it became, with the merger with RLC, then it became HEDFC. And I think that's important because it shapes how I do the work that I do, but it's also the lens that I see from, because I was there when we had a city that had, some 15, 18 community development corporations working to create single family for sale housing in neighborhoods. They were supporting contractors in the development of multifamily housing. I understood how multi-layered financing occurred using governmental, primarily HUD funds, how it occurred. And I learned from the masters. KJA is what we used to call him, KJA, Carl J. Atterbury, James I., Everett Tomlin, Stan Barrett.
Tomlin real quick, because I didn't know that Tomlin was your brother-in-law. And as soon as you mentioned Tomlin, it came to my mind. Tomlin made it possible for a lot of people to get big time financing. And when I was in construction, I had $1 million bonding capacity, never had more than a $20,000 line of credit.
Yep.
And
Yep.
John Wood gave me that. He was at one of the banks. But talk about Everett and what his role was in bringing forth uh, uh, development in the Black community.
So as I said, I've never had a bad boss. My first boss was Everett Tomlin. So full disclosure, he was my brother-in-law. I was trying to figure out what the heck I want to do in my life. And he was like, hey, come work with me. And I'm like, what do you do? And he said, well, I do economic development. I'm like, what's that? And so, between what he told me and he brought me on, and then I coupled that later with what Don Maxwell, particularly a saying that stood out for me, ghetto to gold mine, the choice is yours, which was made by Bernard Powell of SAC 20, Social Action Committee of 20 men who were trying to change the climate of their community. That's right, Carlos. I know my history. So I'm rooted in history and success along with the failures of our history. But Everett Tomlin really he put me on. And so I learned mixed layered multi-financing from him and KJA, Carl Atterbury, every day. Love Mr. Atterbury. We would have long talks because you know how Carl was. And I say that with so much reverence, rest his soul. And so I would not be here if it wasn't for Everett Tomlin, who gave me a foundation to understand how economic development, primarily financing work, and also how contracting should work for African American contractors. And so now we are so far removed from that now because we have, I can count on one hand the amount of Black contractors that we have that can go through the arduous task of bonding and lines of credits and making payrolls and all of that stuff. It is vastly different than it is now.
Last but least, because I want to have you on again, but one of the things that was going in my mind, how did you establish your relationship? I think Turner is one of your lead contractor, because working the thing that I like about and that I've heard about community builders and all of that, nobody has ever said y'all was a front. And boy, that and most of the time when you start working with these large contractors, that's what happens. And everything that I have heard about community builders, it all emanates with you. That Negro Emmett Pearson. I'm just giving it to you raw, baby. That don't nobody else's name come into that conversation. And that, I'm saying, for me, a Black businessman, that says a lot. It might not say to the whole public what that actually means and how strong you have to be and really understand your industry, and not just understand your industry, understand your worth.
Yeah, so Carlos, that's a lot there. So let me break it up. So one, let me first say this. Oftentimes I am the face of community builders, but I have the absolute best staff, Black and white. So let me say that. Because I've also heard that nonsense about I hire a whole bunch of white folk. Yeah, I heard it.
Yes, I never heard that.
I've heard it. And so I'm gonna say I roll with who rolled with me. Okay. So I roll who rolls with me when I didn't have this big giant platform. So that's first and foremost. Second of all, I'm a first and foremost a Black man always. And that's important. So I don't care if I'm interacting with these large majority firms. First and foremost, I'm going to make sure that this community that I grew up in, that my mother is still a part of, is going to be reflective of what we do. So, and lastly, they work for me. They work for community builders. I don't work for them. I sign the checks. I sign all checks around here. Okay. And that's important because we are a motivated owner in all of our aspects of development. I'm motivated from what our professional services look like. And so, yes, I have some trusted vendors, Leonard Graham of Telfair and Brown. Yes, he's worked on every single project I've ever worked on. Hardwick Law Firm. Yes, they've worked on every single project I've ever worked on since the inception of my career. So, but then from there, how do we begin to try to bring on new voices, such as LM2 Latasha McCall, okay, who's killing the game right now. I make the sheet. She's been on every project that I've ever done since I've been
the
back.
general contractor woman? Somebody told me there's a giant in general contracting that's a woman.
African American female construction contractor in the country. Okay. Now I knew her before she was that. I knew her when she was back at Western Blueprint. But we go way back, and so we always have no less than 25% on our construction for people of color. And I'm gonna say this: when I say people of color, I'm trying to get it to where it's all African American. But Carlos, I just can't do it right now because I don't have the pool to pull from. So, but we try to give every opportunity for you to be a part of this now. And so you probably heard this, Carlos, that I can be an a-hole, both on the contractor and some to our own contractors. We have to be better than. You heard it. You got to be twice as good. Yeah. So don't come to me talking about, hey, Emmett, I want to be on this project, but can you call my supplier and make sure? No. Now I'm not saying we haven't done that, Carlos. I've indemnified J.E. Dunn on doing work to make sure that a brother or sister work with us. That's how Greenleaf Construction back in the day got on. I'm not going to say I haven't made payroll for people every other week or every week. I'm not saying I don't do that.
And let me say this. I told you I was a general contractor. And when I went out of business, I tried to do what you're alluding to. I told you the last contract was blocking up that castle. And I tried to have a black contract. This is, you're talking about in the mid 80s, early 90s. And they couldn't make their payroll and Davis Bacon and this and that. And that can tie your firm up on you trying to do some things for some other people. So,
I mean, and because we, we do the larger projects, and that doesn't mean that we don't have a strong grassroots effort around neighborhoods and organizing. But I'm typically known, and community business is known for doing office buildings, shopping centers, and those, as you know, those are all prevailing wage jobs. It's no way around it. So you have to be able to play in that arena. So the challenge is, how do we begin to grow folk to get in that arena? And so, what I also have to deal with is that when we get a project, I can't hire all black folk. I can't. When Cerner was out there building, $1 billion worth of stuff, did y'all make sure that all of us got on there? But you better believe when Emmett and community business does a project, well, you're not hiring enough. I can't hire everybody. It's only, I don't get to do the $100 million projects. I do the $25, $30 million projects. So, that's a challenge. I will say this, and since you and I are boys and family, we don't brag about this, but in the last probably 24 to 36 months, we've supported African American developers, contractors to the tune of about $3.5 million. So what does that mean? Either we've guaranteed loans, we bought down interest rates, we've allowed them, we've been co-signers, we put up CDs, much like what the organization DMDC, Downtown Minority Development Corporation, used to do, that was started by James I. Threed, as we were talking about. I've tried to take some of that learnings and try to apply that to today's methodologies. And so, we have about 3 or 4 contractors that we're supporting, with not only financial resources, but also I make my staff available to them as well. Now, I don't talk about that because that's not everybody's business, and I'm not trying to put their business out there. But I hear oftentimes we're not doing enough. And you're right, we're not doing enough. But I do the max with the resources that I have because I don't have, operational support from the city. I get a little bit of operational support from 2 of our foundations here. But my $1.9 million budget or whatever it is, it's what we eat is based off what we kill. So, yeah, we have a ton of assets, Carlos. We have $128 million in assets. I got a bunch of assets, but that don't help cash flow. And as a former contractor, you know what how important cash flow is.
That's why I'm not in construction no more.
Right. Well, and then Carlos, when I add on to that, I have 2 urban grocery stores that, let me say right to your listeners right now, y'all not supporting the grocery stores. Let me just say that. And I'm gonna leave that alone, let them marinate. I'm having to support grocery stores, one to the tune of about 40 grand a week.
As I said, we're gonna bring you back on to talk about some of them. We got about a minute left.
Okay.
I want to close out, and when you invest in your community, you're really just investing in yourself.
Good day. Program is brought to you by the Kansas City Business Association.